teachers
We
weren't
are live. Let's give it a second in case anybody wants to hop on. I'm not. Yeah, I'm not recording. Well, I did put out like some, Instagram stories saying we're actually recording tonight.
I forgot to even do that. Not
So,
forgot. I took a nap.
oh yeah, that's right. Whatever.
Sorry.
This ain't even my whole night.
Man, I had shit to do. I had to talk therapy. Get all them blessings.
You had to put that pantyhose on your head.
Does it look like pantyhose?
It looks like you're wearing pantyhose.
That's all right.
I mean, it's better than your neo-lib MAGA hat. So it would be double trouble if you wore the MAGA hat over that.
What if I wore the Bears hat over this?
Oh shit! All right,
And just said "ow my knee" a lot.
All right, we can
live and direct.
We can get started here.
All
fuck else we gonna do?
That's the spirit.
Welcome in. Welcome back to Revolutionary Roulette. I'm Rob Zielinski, and you can find me on Twitter at Rob Zielinski. That's ZIELINSKI. Follow us on Instagram at Revolutionary Roulette or email the show at revolutionaryroulette@gmail.com. And I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Mr. Joshua Catlow.
Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am on Facebook and Instagram at Joshua Patrick without the lisp, and on Twitter talking to Matt Bowen about how Jason Spriggs and Jermaine Afredi will be the death of me sometime in the near future, at Joshua Catlow.
So before we get started, just a quick correction from last week, as it was Hitler who had a life-size portrait of Henry Ford in his office and not the other way around. And in fact, there are photos of Henry Ford receiving the Grand Cross of the German Eagle from Nazi officials in 1938. Ford was a huge anti-Semite, and 3/4 of Nazi military vehicles, if you looked under the hood, they had Ford motors inside them.
Same with Harley Davidson motorcycles. For all of you real Americans, yeah, they did business with the Nazis during World War II as well. So enjoy that ride.
Did not see that coming again. So last week we left off. There was a smaller mutiny in the New Jersey line where 3 ringleaders were put on trial. 1 was pardoned. 2 were shot by firing squad made up of their friends who cried as they pulled the triggers. And Washington said it was an example. You just make an example of these guys. So
that's essentially what he did. When you send people to their ultimate demise, you try to make an example that could be you. That could be next.
Right. So there was yet another mutiny, this time in the Pennsylvania line 2 years later. That's right. Revolutionary soldiers still have not been paid. So 80 of them invaded the Continental Congress headquarters in Philly to demand their pay. And
very nice.
Yeah, bitch better have my money. And a bunch of members of Congress fled by crossing the river to Princeton like a bunch of wimps and described the soldiers as a handful of drunken mutineers. Like, yeah, what else are they supposed to be? They just fought in your war and didn't get compensated and are now trying to cope with it since you're not giving them what is rightfully theirs. They're coming to take it as well they should.
It was as soon as they were invaded, they essentially sent a running man, an errand boy, if you will, to go and get 3 months of back pay to try and retrieve and hush and make light of the situation. But by that time, most individuals who had served or were still serving in the American side of the war were beyond fed up and frustrated.
Yeah. And a number of states like both Carolinas, Georgia, Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia, to an extent, were also immersed in these divisive civilian conflicts where they were rebelling against authority the entire time the war was on and for years afterwards, too. Again, most states in the South wanted nothing to do with the fighting in the Revolution because they needed their militias to keep slaves down, but it was viewed as a lose-lose situation because they knew they would be under the rule of political elite, whether it was British or American elite.
Exactly. And soldiers had a harder time rebelling because regular people could rebel and not face, let me rephrase, they could face the drastic situations that some of the other people have encountered, which we talked about in the previous episode, making an example of by killing. But soldiers were at first hand taken to the ringer, if you will, when they tried to show any kind of uprising of their own. So,
right.
And essentially, there was no change for them in their mind. There was no change between being ran by the parliamentary government of Britain or the American colonialists, and
That's right.
There really isn't any difference to this day.
No, there's really not. And I think you may have mentioned something along these lines before, but specifically in the Maryland Constitution, in order to run for state Senate seat, you had to own 1,000 pounds of property. And to run for governor, you had to own 5,000 pounds of property. And I'm guessing that means like 1 or 5,000 pounds worth of property. And, I'm not really sure how they assess that.
I took it as acreage, just a different way for acreage.
Yeah,
100% truthful. I was pounds. Yeah,
right. Maybe by the size of the home and how much land they own. Unless like, imagine they broke out a giant scale, just like jacked up the houses, literally weighed the property, and we're like, yeah, sorry, it only weighs 4,999 pounds, so you can't be in the gubernatorial race, but you can run for state Senate.
Bonus.
Anyway, so basically only 10% of the population even had the amount of property to qualify to hold political office, and obviously that's fucked.
Yeah, I don't know why I grabbed my notes to speak about this topic. It was it was a small change to the air quote laws that made it almost impossible for the common man to reach any kind of platform to share his, or let me retract that, to share his ideas of what should be going on in the government. I was going to say his or her, but that's just completely outlandish. His, her, the black, the American Indian voice and the Chinese voice were nowhere near being heard at this time, and it doesn't come for quite some time there.
Right. Yeah. The whole, even though they were white settlers, white women were completely just a complete afterthought. So at this point in time, black slaves made up 25% of the population and up to as much as 50% in certain counties. So the fear of revolting black slaves was growing. Obviously, they wanted their freedom, and they offered to fight in Washington's Revolutionary Army, but he said no. this means that
How fucking stupid can you be, by the way? This is like one of these slanderous moments. It's like you're sitting around with your boys, you're having a scotch, and you're like, man, I don't know what to do. If we go with these British motherfuckers, man, I can't understand what they're saying. They're stupid, they dress funny. And then if we go with the colonists, we got this fucking Washington motherfucker that won't even let us work and try and fight for our own right and safety. What the fuck are we supposed to do?
Right.
That was my brother accent in the colonial times. Excuse me.
Back in the colonial times. So old Georgie boy here was both in favor. This basically meant he was in favor of slavery, and it meant that it could possibly lead to British military commanders offering freedom to slaves to fight with them. And that's exactly what happened. I couldn't find anything that said black slaves fought for the British Army specifically, but a British commander in Virginia promised freedom to slaves if they did. And this had slave owners reeling. Some of them were arming their slaves in case the revolutionary fight came to their home. But after this consternation, they were like, nah, just forget it. We need our weapons back, and took back everything that they gave the black slaves, everything they could, from swords and bayonets to guns.
I had a moment of humor when I was reading that. They described it as the insolence of the quote unquote Negroes when they were talking about seizing 80 guns and tons of bayonets and swords and etc. And insolence, who got diabetes? And that's a joke that Chicago's very own, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, but very prominent comedian that I'll come up with the name of before the end of the show, I promise.
So we know the South wasn't excited about getting into the war, as they were getting shit from both sides. Like, bro, we need whatever war materials you can supply. Leave your family to come and fight, probably die, and tell your family to reduce their consumption while you're away. Deal?
It was March of 2020, but back in 1775.
Right.
When we were hoarding toilet paper and Febreze and all that other shit that we thought we needed.
Sanitizer. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it turned out we were plentiful, just being patient. Well, that was the exact things going on with the white rioting, going against hoarding commodities that were to be brought into slavery. So
right. So these families were forced to make hard decisions, and it sometimes led to evading one side, running into the opposition, and then having to evade them as well. And these were people between basically two fighting countries without a damn country themselves. So this brings us to the boy, Nathaniel Greene, who was the military commander for Washington in the South. Now, obviously, I'm a leftist and don't want to be involved in any kind of war ever, so this all kind of sucks. But Nathaniel Greene, Natty Green over here, had some bipolar-ass policies when it came to dealing with disloyalty, when it came to members of the Loyalist Party. Again, they were loyal to the monarchy, to England. He had about 100 of them killed and the rest of them mutilated. Then, for some reason, he told Georgia's governor, quote, to open a door for the disaffected of your state to come in. So you mentioned Natty Green last week, so I just wanted to see what your specific thoughts were on that.
When he wrote the letter to Thomas Jefferson, he alluded to the dreadful engaging of the loyalists, many of which were killed. The rest were dismantled, dismembered, and tossed aside like rag dolls. And in the letter that I alluded, in which he wrote to Thomas Jefferson, he had the nerve to say it had a great effect on the doubters. Concessions were kept to a minimum, and what I mean by concessions, giving a pass to certain folk that were insubordinate, and then brutality to others in which were insubordinate at that time. So I got a little more to say when it comes to Charles Carroll, but we'll get there a little bit later.
Okay, so thank you for that. And Zinn
You're
mentioned
welcome.
that the American Revolution is sometimes said to have brought about the separation of church and state. And I'm just like, who are these people exactly? Republicans still base most of their legislature on religious BS, with abortion probably being the biggest issue in regards to that. And I think did you mention that you wanted to talk about Supreme Court Justice David Brewer?
I did. There was
So he was the one way back in 1892 who said that this is a Christian nation.
Correct. Supreme Court Justice Brewer served as a judge for 20 years. And for some reason, when I was learning about Justice Brewer, I had a picture of Brett Kavanaugh in mind. And just when he was initially appointed by President Dick Nose, he had to go through the trial because of his past and his dealings with alcohol. So all I kept hearing with Justice Brewer was, I like beers. But even though it would have been ales.
Yeah, I like ale.
But he was educated at the University of Ale. And he was the only judges to abstain in the Plessy versus Ferguson case. What that means is he chose to sit out, not make a decision, and not even hear. To clarify that, argument. Obviously he knows what was going on in Plessy versus Ferguson, but he chose not to be a part of the
oral argument.
Exactly. The oral argument,
the written decision,
the whole process. Right. And just to clarify, that was the landmark decision made by the U.S. Supreme Court that allowed a constitutional doctrine for racial segregation. So, obviously, he was a Republican, known as a Republican, even way back in those times. But it was kind of shown to what degree he was separated from the rest of his peers by abstaining from such a landmark decision, such a landmark case and trial. Right. Most of which were in favor of segregation at that time, obviously, but to not even to thumb your nose at it was unruly.
So one thing I would keep in mind is back in the day, the Republicans had policies of like current day Republicans. There was like this party switch in the 1900s. So that's why Republicans get to say things like Lincoln was the president of the Republican Party. So right. Yeah, just something to keep in mind, because that's not I don't think that's common knowledge. So Zinn packs so much in this next paragraph that I just have to read it. Quote, "One would look in examining the revolution's effect on class relations at what happened to land confiscated from fleeing loyalists. It was distributed in a way as to give a double opportunity to the revolutionary leaders to enrich themselves and their friends, and to parcel out some land to small farmers to create a broad base of support for the new government. Indeed, this became characteristic of a new nation. Finding itself possessed of enormous wealth, it could create the richest ruling class in history and still have enough for the middle classes to act as a buffer between the rich and the dispossessed.
And acting as a buffer is something that we've become all too familiar with, just to try and smooth things over with the everyday people, or to pull the wool over their eyes to act like everything's going to be all right and everything is fine, and which we know that that wasn't the case, especially for this time and place of which these things were going on.
Right. And this is a common theme. We've mentioned this just about every week now. So I know we keep pounding the same subject matter, the same point, but it makes so much sense once we start talking about general strikes, mass strikes, things of that sort, when it comes to the class war. So one of the spoils of the American Revolutionary War was the confiscation of the giant landholdings of members of the Loyalist Party. Lord Fairfax in Virginia, by the way, there's still a Fairfax, Virginia, who across 21 different counties had 5 million acres of land. And
that's it?
That's all, just a mere 5 million. And in Maryland, Lord Baltimore's holdings were over 3,000 pounds a year. And I'm pretty sure there's still a city named after old Baltimore there. Anyway, Lord Fairfax did not have his shit taken away. Even after the revolution, he was spared. And why? Because he was tight with George Washington. Like, what the actual F, guy? Like, you are the Major General of the American Army, turned the world upside down by defeating England, you know, the world turned upside down, all that shit. But you somehow stay loyal to a damn British beans on toast, fish and chips loving loyalist. So it's like, no, Georgie Porgy, you don't, you know, you need to go out there, tie fart facts to a post and shoot him up like you made your own soldiers shoot their friends and, you know, make an example out of him. Like, no, it's okay when you're saving your already connected buddy and protecting him, but it's not okay when mutineers are desperately trying to get the government that they helped install to pay them for said job and, you know, for living through it and possibly, you know, losing sons, nephews, friends in the war. And it just makes me sick, man. It all makes me sick. Can't deal with this shit right now.
All I had while you were going through your topic there, your rant, was I was thinking of Billy Madison. You got to think. You got a responsibility. You got to get out there and find that fucking dog. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, I just
we laugh to keep from crying.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, it's so, you know, there's no point in being so angry about it or having it be anxiety inducing now. It just it's hard to explain what the exact feeling is. It's hurt, like you feel betrayed because you're just like, we learned all this, again, whitewashed history in school. None of this stuff is mentioned. You know, the information is out there if you want to go out and find out for yourself, but you're just like, oh, my guy was just chopping down a cherry tree. They made him president and like everything was all good. Nothing happened before that. Like, you know, he won the Revolutionary War by, you know, retreating. And that's all you learn, you know, and his teeth were made of wool. Like that's That's how you learn in school, like this stupid shit. He had wooden teeth.
Essentially,
That's not even true. His teeth weren't made of wood. They were teeth from slaves that he extracted from there and put in his mouth. Like
he went and saw Paul Wall and got the original grill,
right?
Which just happened to be live human teeth.
I'm Paul Wall, baby. What you know about me?
Call me George Foreman because I'm selling everybody grills.
So some of the land that did get confiscated did go to some of the disaffected people who then became freeholding small farmers, and the people who caused so much trouble for the colonial elites for years before the revolution.
Well, essentially that happened because they realized that they needed to eat. It was about that time. Things were not going as anticipated per every chapter of this book that we fucking got into so far.
Yeah.
And they realized that they needed to do something to make peace and make a way for. So they threw a bouquet at the feet of the farmers in the smallest form and fashion.
Yes. Yeah, and exactly. This goes back to just the buffer zone. Just again, it was just, give these babies some land so that they'll shut up and leave us alone, like a literal pacifier to quiet down poverty-stricken people in the form of land and maybe livable, not a wage, but some sort of livelihood. And these were just crumbs, but it worked, right? It worked. It worked because it kept them off the backs of the elites, and the land redistribution wasn't enough to fundamentally change the class structure.
It's been a while since you had me stuttering.
It just sucks because there's so much, like, you again drawing parallels to today. Like, okay, let's give people during the pandemic $1,200. They could shut the fuck up, buy as much hand sanitizer and TP as they would like, and maybe
nothing's never nearly enough.
Right. So then it's like, we don't have, vaccine hasn't been developed yet. Let's throw another. It hurts. It's their own money. It's theirs, right. But we're going to have to give them another $1,200. And this time it's going to be means tested. If, for even harder, it was means tested all 3 times that it happened thus far. If you make a certain amount of money, you can't make it. And it's like, and it was a pretty relatively low threshold. Like, we're talking like 75,000. But if you lost your job in March because everything shut down, well, you're the 75,000 you make a year. A lot of times that's not enough to have any kind of money saved. I mean, people are like 2 paychecks or 1 injury away because of the terrible healthcare this country has, away from being completely bankrupt. So again, they do this means testing instead of, like, they're so worried about, well, what if we give a billion, millionaire, billionaire the $1,200? We're wasting money. Yes, it is. You just get it back via taxes the next year, which you should be doing always anyway. And you're not taxing these the rich folks and the corporations at all in a lot of cases. So again, it's just this sort of placating, here, just take this little bit of money. Maybe it'll hold you over enough so that there's not a general strike and you don't have the economy coming to a grinding halt.
Speaking of grinding halt and economy, a lot of this makes a perfect parallel or segue to current day politics. And you find that very often when we're in discussion on this podcast. For instance, when pitched to the United States public, the tax rate of the rich was supposed to be at 28%, but Biden and company thought it would be a brilliant idea to negotiate against themselves
Yeah.
and not the Republican Party and I'm a bitch Mitch and company. And they negotiated themselves down to 25%. And I doubt it's even going to be there when it's all said and done. But with the breaks and the strategies that are in place to um, help keep the elite, none of the numbers or percentages essentially matter until there's actually structural change. But you can just kind of get a feel for where these things started, and that was even well before the Revolutionary War started in 1775. So just to get a
And
feel. Go ahead.
yeah, a little more perspective on that. Speaking of where it started, the tax rate, started at like 35%, and Trump with the reconciliation bill brought it all the way down to 21%. So when Biden was going to put it back up to 28%, it still wasn't even at the original level of 35% because
Right.
he and his elites need more money. And so the number was 28. And because Joe Manchin holds all the power as basically independent, he's basically a Republican in Democrat clothing. He got that knocked down to 25%. So it's still down 10% from what it was, I think, under Obama. So we're just the lower classes. This is what we're talking about when we say wage war is class war is being waged always, and most people just don't know it. They don't know these details, but this is why you should pay attention to what's going on. If you're apolitical at this point, it's a privilege for you. You are privileged. Like, that's not to say you need to like watch CNN and MSNBC or whatever, because I don't do that. But like, when you're scrolling Facebook or Twitter, you find, somebody interesting, retweet something, an article, read that. That's how you learn, figure out who the source is. Sometimes it depends on the source, could be bad, or they have an agenda too. So just things to think about. But if you are strictly apolitical and you're like, I'm not voting, it doesn't matter anyway, it's not going to affect me, you're showing your privilege, because just because it's not going to affect you doesn't mean it's not going to affect others. Like, again, poor folks or people of LGBTQ plus community, especially right now, trans folks who are really being targeted, and just like in the most disgusting way. And it's just like, they're just people trying to live their lives. Like they just identify as the sex. They don't feel right inside. And as soon as they make that switch, everything changes. And, they're just happier people for it. They're just let people be. But, so many, like we alluded to earlier, with the religious aspects of Republicans and their religious legislature, everything is, no, family needs to be man and a woman, and that's it. No sex changes. God made you how you are. I hate to break it to you. No, he didn't. He didn't. There's no God. He doesn't do that. So, yeah, it's just it's super frustrating. So do what you can, especially at the local level. We say it almost every week. Just do what you can. I know it's been hard with the pandemic all last year. It's still bleeding into this year. We're now at 600,000 deaths from that. So, just stay safe and do what you can. If you've been vaxxed, you want to get out there and do some kind of activism in your area. More power to you. Like I said, if I can change somebody's mind from speaking behind this microphone, it's it's worth it.
That was a well articulated thought. Usually we save the kudos until after the show, but everything you just spit out for the last few minutes was very informative and poignant, and
Thank you.
people need to hear it. So, Charles Carroll.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ahead.
No, I was going to say.
I just want to get this out of the way, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Actually, go ahead because I'm good with the chapter. I do want to hear your thoughts.
He's
your notes.
We kind of went, I don't want to say out of order here, because Charles Carroll's role is nowhere near as important as Nathaniel Greene's role, but he was mentioned in the chapter, so we'll talk about him a little bit. Charles Carroll was born into a wealthy Roman Catholic family in Annapolis, Maryland. He began his rather remarkable formal education at the age of 8 at a Jesuit college at Saint Omer. Excuse me. You could tell what I'm reading from when you hear how they describe his education. Bear with me for a second, though, folks. It gets better, and I'll throw my own opinion into this. At the age of 28, he returned to his home into the radical climate produced by the Stamp Act, walked a highly refined gentleman with all of the education and experience that might be expected of an emissary of the finest courts in Europe. Charles Carroll is said to have identified with the radical cause at once, and he proceeded to work in the circles of American patriots. In 1772, he anonymously engaged the Secretary of the Colony of Maryland in a series of newspaper articles protesting the rights of British government to tax the colonies without representation. Carroll was an early advocate for armed resistance with the object of separation from Great Britain. However, his native colony was less certain in the matter and did not even send a representative to the First Continental Congress. He served on the First Committee of Safety at Annapolis in 1775 and also in the Provincial Congress. Here's where I wanted to make an interesting parallel. Charles Carroll was the slaveholder represented in the movie written by Steve McQueen, 12 Years a Slave. For those of you who have not seen it, I suggest throwing it on your must-watch list. It's an absolutely fantastic story. The slave represented in said movie, there was tons of them, but the main character, I'm going to butcher this poor man's name because I always do. Chiwetel Ejiofor. I believe I got it pretty good on that one. My apologies. Solomon Northup was the slave that was represented as the main character. He was a free citizen of New York, kidnapped in Washington, D.C. Kidnapped in Washington, D.C., and sold back into slavery in Louisiana. Finally, to get his freedom in 1853. He labored on the bayou for 12 years. He created a memoir about his freedom as a man who suffered as a slave, even though he was a free man. So hence 12 years a slave. His memoir led to contributions to the national dialogue on abolitionists. Northup was unsuccessful in his legal actions when he tried to bring his case in front of the courts, which I hate to put it this way, but who didn't see that coming? Northup was unsuccessful in the legal actions, and as the laws of jurisdictions prohibited his ability to even speak against certain people during that time. So I just thought it was an interesting parallel that they brought up Charles Carroll, and he was the main person in the movie, or the main slaveholder in the movie, which a lot of us have seen. Um, so I thought it was an interesting parallel.
I have not seen the movie, and you said it was written by Steve McQueen. Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct. And I'm not sure if it's old school Western gunslinging Steve McQueen, or if it's just someone with the same title.
But yeah, I'm thinking of like The Great Escape, Steve McQueen.
Right. Yeah. I did not do that lookup.
Okay. I mean, maybe he wrote it decades ago and they just turned it into a movie.
Could be.
So we got a couple of comments, so I want to read these before we head off here. So this is from Dark Sage 9117. I read a book a while back about King George III and his reign in England, and what struck me was that he was not necessarily for a war in the colonies, but rather he wanted to keep England's reputation as a great power intact, because he knew to other European nations it would make England look weak if they lost to a colony so far away. Question is, if that's correct and George really did believe that fighting the war was more for pride and honor than losing, how exactly do you justify that to the House of Commons or people back home? I'm not exactly sure. This would be pure speculation. I would say that he probably did not want to go to war because I want to say like war wasn't quite the money-making machine it is now. It costs money to send troops, boats, across the pond to fight a war. They had soldiers and stuff already in the colonies, and it would just be easier and make him more money if they just paid the taxes, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was the problem. He was trying to tax the population who was already hurting very, very badly. So this is how it all kind of got spun. If you go back and listen to the previous episodes, you'll see why all of this led to the American Revolution. So, how do you justify that to the House of Commons? It's probably like they didn't. I don't know if they really had a true like parliament there, because he was a king. He's the dictator. He's going to say, Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I first and foremost, thank you for the question and thank you for listening. I think it was an oversimplification on his part, thinking that with all the turmoil going on, that they would be able to kind of run amok, if you will. Exactly. But they didn't necessarily account for the fact that how many of the people here were going to be picking up their own arms and fighting on the side of the American colonists, while all the time Washington and Jefferson knew that they needed these people who were trained, I don't want to say military men, but trained with arms. They needed them to be on the side of the American colonists to essentially have a chance to win this war. So right. I think it was a misallocation of information that led to them thinking that it would be a semi-cakewalk by bringing their own troops over. But
right, I agree. That sounds about right. Like England is a superpower at this point, and they're just like, well, these are like our like little brothers, right? They came from here. Like we are gonna pound on these Puritans, and then show France that like we're nothing to mess with in Spain. So you're right. I think it was this sort of miscalculation. He just kind of underrated them, underestimated them.
And then Spain looked up and was like, "Not today, bitch."
So yeah, I hope that answers. I mean, again, we're just having a conversation.
Pure speculation on both parts, but we could do a little bit of research into that and get a more definitive rebuttal next week. So continue to listen, and we'll dedicate some time to it as well.
Yeah, and like I said, go ahead and listen back to those previous episodes, and get caught up, and you'll have a little bit more background on that. And if you have the name of that book, research it, let us know. Again, you could email us at revolutionaryroulette@gmail.com, and we could have a little bit of a discourse there. So we'll leave it there. And if there was something
you said comments.
What?
Oh, you counted that as more than a comment.
That was 2.
Well, I thought we
actually got 3.
I was like, damn, let's do this.
No, just from the same. No, it got broken down. Actually, there's 3 separate comments, and he says, he or she, or non-binary, I don't know, non-conforming individual.
We still fucks with you.
Yeah, Dark Sage just says, have a question for this panel about the American Revolution. So, yeah, we tried our best. So, yeah, let me know. What are you thinking before we wrap up here?
All I can tell you for certain is don't cross the streams when it comes to Ghostbusters and when it comes to life. And what I'm talking about is obviously they crossed the river to go to Princeton because they needed the money, and because they were about to get their shit kicked in from a bunch of unhappy, to say the least,
drunk white
soldiers.
People. Yep.
Yeah, they were off that Henny. It was starting to get cold. They had holes in the boots. They're like, I can't even tie my shoes. My fingers are so cold. What are we doing? And so we didn't get to the runner when they sent the runner to get the 3 months back pay. And actually, we I think we might have discussed that last week. Now, yeah, they sent the runner to get 3 months back pay, and they decided to take notes of what was bothering the troops, which is laughable too. But as for this week, there was just more of the same, man. And unfortunately, that's how it goes. I think what stands out is the Nathaniel Green letter to Thomas Jefferson, and how sociopathic he was in explaining that I think our killing spree and dismantlement of human beings had a wonderful representation on those who were doubters. That kind of speaks volumes.
Yeah.
But whoa, whew, yeah. What is it good for? I don't even know, man.
Lots and lots of money.
That's exactly it. Apache helicopters. So and a bunch of other shit I can't afford.
All right. That's going to do it. So until next time, at the risk of sounding eloquent, this should push you left. Thanks, folks.